Hi, everyone. Welcome back to a new episode of Dare to be Fearless. Before I get into this episode, make sure that you head to the show notes and find out more about Metro Podcasts, which is where we are filming today. And if you are not following Dare to be Fearless on Instagram, head to Instagram and type in Dare, the number 2, and then be fearless. So before I introduce today's guest, for those who don't know, when you really embark and get further into your entrepreneurial journey, finances is obviously something that is very critical to any founder. Now, because I built a personal brand for so many years, the finances part really was not something that was on the top of my mind. But as I've embarked more into entrepreneurship, understanding everything from like accounting tools like QuickBooks to Stripe to all of the ways and means that people bring in revenue as a business owner has been something that I've been really interested in. I also think that fintech is such a awesome space to be in. So I have the co-founder of Cadana here today, Ameer Shujjah.
Got it.
I said his name right. Amazing. And you immigrated here from Pakistan.
I did, yes.
You built this company. You guys have raised 7.5 million, I think,
Correct.
so far. And you're also an ex-banker,
Yeah.
which I love. I've interviewed so many founders on this podcast, and all the guys seem to come from banking, which is quite unique. But I would love for you to essentially start from the beginning of your journey when you were younger and then how you got into entrepreneurship.
Gotcha. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Very exciting. So I grew up in Pakistan and I came to the US for college. But when I was in Pakistan, my dad was in the army, so we would move like every couple of years. So what that meant for me was like every 2 years, you basically have to like start over, make new friends, kind of assimilate. And that's like a whole experience in itself. But I think when I came to the US, that actually like kind of helped me assimilate to this a lot better. And credit to our parents because they really valued our education, so they would send us to the best possible schools that they could, which made it possible for me to actually come to the US. Because I don't think I was like the smartest kid or the hardest working kid, but because I had the support of my parents and they always kind of tried to give us the best education, I was actually able to come to the US. And even in the US, I got into one of the very few colleges that gives financial aid to international students. So like everything kind of aligned, and all of that had to happen for me to actually like get to the U.S. and experience what life is like here. So that's how I kind of got here to start.
That's so interesting. The school that you went to is also where you met your now co-founder.
Correct.
Were you guys like Facebook style? Like were you roommates? What was the situation?
So my co-founder's from Ghana. I'm from Pakistan. Grinnell, Iowa, Grinnell College, for those who don't know, is in Iowa, which is like a remote state in the U.S. I don't know if you've ever been.
No.
Exactly.
I never had heard of this university before I looked
Exactly.
into it.
It's like a small liberal arts college. It's very good academically, but unfortunately it is in like rural Iowa. So we both came from these countries. It's like an hour from the nearest airport. So you land in the airport and then you have to like drive an hour through like these cornfields. So the first impression is like, what the hell's going on? This is not the America I was promised to. But it's funny, like for both of us, we got there a week early because we have international student orientation before. And we basically met on the first day. We both had very similar stories. We became friends. We ended up majoring in the exact same subjects, physics and computer science. So we had like a lot of classes together. And then after college, we ended up becoming roommates. So he's basically like one of my best friends. I've known him for, 12 odd years now. So when it came time to starting a company, it was like a very easy decision to like do it with him.
What did you study?
Physics and computer science.
At a liberal arts school.
Correct.
Why?
Again, a lot of experimentation, I'd say,
Okay.
went into it. I took a lot of like other subjects. Physics is something I really enjoyed, and computer science I took up like later on, and it was also something that, with computer science, you can like build some things very easily and tangibly and kind of see the impact,
Yeah.
and that's something that I found very kind of appealing in that aspect. Because I loved sciences growing up, but computer science made it very tangible because you can like actually build something yourself.
Quite interesting.
Yeah.
I've interviewed a lot of immigrant founders on this podcast, and especially with your family and whatnot. A lot of times, anyone from a different country, right? You come over here, and I find a lot of parents of like immigrant kids are very much wanting you to follow like a traditional path. And
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up. When I was coming to the U.S., I convinced my parents that I was going to do engineering. So Grinnell has this program, they call it like a 3-2 program, where you spend 3 years at Grinnell, and then 2 years you could go to like a traditional engineering college like WashU or like Columbia and like get an engineering degree.
Yeah.
So that was my mindset coming in. But then when I got here and I started taking these subjects, I was like, I really don't have to do that.
No.
Yeah.
And then why did you decide, though, to start a company? Like entrepreneurship-wise, were you always keen to be?
I've been building things like when I was a kid too. I used to build websites when I was a kid, but I don't think at that time it was like, oh, I'm gonna do this and like build a company. I don't think I could actually like imagine doing that when I was in Pakistan. But when I got to the US and I was like, okay, I'm capable of building things, and I see all these other people who were able to turn that into a company, then I was like, okay, maybe this is something that I can actually do as well too. So being in the US, I think was a key driver in kind of giving me the perspective that this is something that I can actually do.
Was this a culture shock for you, though, like coming here from there?
It was in a lot of ways, and I'll tell you a funny story. When I was growing up, I grew up watching like Friends, shows like Friends or like How I Met Your Mother or like Seinfeld. So they're all based in like New York, and then you come to the U.S. and then you like land in Iowa out of all places, and everything is just so different. And I'm like, this is not the America that I signed up for. It was a great experience. Like, it was a great experience, but just in general, it was very interesting to me to be like, okay, America is like so big that there's so many different parts to it, which is why when I graduated, I was like, okay, I have to go to New York because that's where a lot of the ambition and a lot of people are there.
I feel like when people come right to New York, like New York and LA are the two places that I feel like your whole world kind of opens up.
Yeah, it's true.
I mean, I grew up in a really small town. I've never been to Pakistan in particular.
Yeah.
However, even just like being in a big city now, I feel like a lot more inspired being around people.
Exactly, yeah.
Did you feel like that at university?
University, I was inspired by all the other kids I was with because they have a very high percentage of like international kids and a lot of people from like all over the US. So I think just being amongst that diverse group was interesting, learning about people's backgrounds and just seeing where they all come from.
It's funny though, you mentioned that as a kid, you were building websites?
I was from like ages 13 to like 17, yeah.
What kind of websites? Because that shows that like you had entrepreneurship in you.
Yeah, mostly gaming websites. So I still sometimes love gaming, but it's just, I would create websites like online arcades. I had like a gaming forum at one point.
Wow. Yeah. And none of it ended up scaling?
No, it was like I was doing it for fun, and at one point I got more into like tennis and other things. I was like, all right, I'll just pause that for now. Yeah.
So you graduate college, and then what was your next step from there? Did you come right to New York then?
I did come to New York. So I wanted to find a job in New York. So I landed a job at Deutsche Bank as an analyst, and I did that for a year. Didn't really like it, and then I moved back to like tech at Amazon.
I just did a whole thing with this Instagram page, Overheard on Wall Street, about like finance.
Yeah.
All these bankers, like everyone hates working, I feel like, in finance.
It just depends on what you like. For me, because I also have like a tech background and I actually like building things, I think the things that we're doing there just weren't that interesting to me. So I wanted to be in the more for like a big tech. Yeah.
If someone is watching this and feels like they're also really interested in tech and coding, perhaps wants to start a company in the future but doesn't know what the first step is, what would you suggest for them?
I don't think you need a product to like validate an idea. So you don't actually need to like build anything to validate an idea. The hardest part usually is like getting customers, and that you can do just off of like a simple page you build off of like Squarespace or any of these other websites. So even though you don't know any tech, there's so many tools that let you just experiment with like a landing page or just like a simple form that you can send out. So I would say do that first to actually know if what you're doing actually makes sense. And then after that, yes, you can find people who can build it. You can also learn. It's pretty easy, computer engineering, but the first step should be figure out if the idea actually makes sense.
So right after college, when you came here, did you have any money? I mean, you're working this first job, and then you leave that. So how were you essentially paying for your life?
So I worked at Deutsche Bank for a year, and then I worked at Amazon for a couple of years, and that's when I saved up money that I used when we actually started the company.
Yeah. And how much did it take to start this kind of a...
For both of us, we took about like $50K each.
Wow, okay.
And the idea was, part of that was going to pay for the company, and the other part was going to sustain us for a couple of years. We're also in New York. It's a very expensive kind of city to be in. So that's like what we put in, and then we were on it for a while until we got into an accelerator and got funding later on.
Got it. And what exactly the year that you started this was during COVID?
2021, beginning of 2021.
Which is quite interesting because a lot of companies that started during COVID did not sustain COVID.
Yeah.
So when you started this, who came up with the idea first? And on top of that, how did you find that there was a need for this in the market? Because you've got, I mean, in terms of like competition, even though it's different, I mean, their Stripe is really like the number one processing system out there.
Yeah, so I think there's different layers to this. One, the timing of why we started was more driven by our legal status to be able to actually start a company. Like I was waiting for my immigration from Amazon to solidify before I could start this. My co-founder was waiting for a visa before we could start this. So us actually quitting our jobs was more a function of as soon as we got our visas and immigration, we were like, okay, we can actually do this full time. In terms of the idea itself, we've been talking about it for like a year prior, just trying to like iterating, figuring out how exactly we want to do and what we want to start with.
And then what's the first step? I mean, why did you decide to do this type of company?
Yeah, I mean, my co-founder, just for reference, he was at Goldman Sachs. So we both have kind of a finance background. We both have like a tech background. So we wanted to do something that kind of combines the two. In terms of how we went about it, we're both very product-focused people. So we ended up building the product first, which is not the right thing to do if you want to start a company. That's what we've learned.
Okay.
So we built like an MVP, and then we went out and through referrals tried to find like at least one person who would use it. And our first product was this product called Earned Wage Access, if you're familiar with the term.
No.
So Earned Wage Access means in the US you have a bi-weekly pay cycle, which means you get paid every 2 weeks. In a lot of the emerging markets, which is where we started doing this, it's once a month. So you're basically getting paid once a month. You're also in emerging markets, so you're not getting paid that much. So there's a lot of issues that happen when you don't have access to the money that you're kind of owed by your employer. So Earned Wage Access is we work with the employer to unlock those earnings for you, which means on any given day, you can take out that portion of your salary, right? So if Alexa earns, let's say, $1,000 in a month, on the 15th, she can take out $500. She doesn't have to wait for her paycheck. And that was the most impactful thing that we could do to kind of get our foot into the door and actually create value for people.
Okay, so it's called Earned Wage Access.
Earned Wage Access is the.
And is that like a common term in the finance or fintech space?
It is, yeah. It's a popular concept in the US. I think there's a few companies that do it, not so much in emerging markets, which we later found out was for various reasons. But yeah, it's pretty popular now. Yeah.
A lot of the reason that people don't embark on entrepreneurship, especially after working at a cushier job like a bank or Amazon, is because of the money. So that $50K, it was combined $100K each you guys put into this. Where did that money go to at the beginning?
Sustaining ourselves because we had no income and we were roommates in New York living in a 1-bedroom flex apartment, so it wasn't like
Where was this?
In Hudson Yards actually. We had I remember we had one window in the whole apartment that we would alternate like getting sunlight from, but
classic.
So it was like sustaining us, and then we had to hire a few people to build some parts of the product that we couldn't build ourselves, and also a lot of the stuff that we were doing required some legal or compliance components, so we had to like pay some firms to get that going.
Was that intimidating for you to leave a bank or a job?
It's 100%. I mean, it's one of the hardest things you're going to do, especially for me. Same for my co-founder. We don't have any family in the U.S., which is why we were like, we had to get our immigration, so at least we wouldn't get kicked out. Because otherwise, if you're working and you lose your job, you have a few months before you have to leave the country. So we're like, okay, that's kind of a non-starter, so at least get our immigration, so at least we won't get kicked out, and the money and stuff we can always kind of figure out how to do. So it's definitely like very like a daunting experience. The way I looked at it always was from like a regret optimization framework, which is, okay, if I don't do this now, when am I gonna do it? And also like, if I do this now and it fails, even if I spend 5 years on it, I'm still fairly young. I can always go back to like a cushion job and like, sure, I lost some savings, but at the end of the day, the downside isn't really that bad if you really think about it.
That's why I'm so fascinated by entrepreneurs. And I mean, my experience is so different because I never had that cushy job. So I went like
straight into it,
Yeah, which is insane because but you're almost more naive. I mean, when you do what you did, you leave that security and you start this, but I wish that more people realize that you can always go back.
Yeah,
I think that's what people forget.
I think so. I think the simple exercise you should do is just, what is the absolute worst case?
Yeah.
And if you actually like, with like actual probabilities, you're like, it's actually not that bad if you have like a job to start with. If you were good enough to get hired once, after this experience, you should be even more hireable, right?
Yeah,
so
of course. Yeah. And how many times when you guys launched did you make any pivots, if any? Because during the pandemic, I mean, I don't know if there was a lot of learning lessons.
No, there were. There were very, it was all within the same kind of sphere of payroll and global payroll, but we did make a lot of pivots. For example, when we started doing Earned Wage Access, one of the key components for that to happen is you need a source of truth to tell you how much Alexa earns and with what company. And answering that question is very easy in the US because you have these big payroll companies that have that data. So you can just go to them and be like, tell me how much Alexa earns. But when you go to emerging markets, that infrastructure doesn't exist. So as soon as we launched and we got a few customers, we're like, these people don't even have like a payroll software. Like everything is manual, done on like Google Sheets. We actually need to give them like a payroll system that they can rely on. So that was like the first kind of mini pivot. And then once we expanded to multiple markets, and this is during COVID, so remote work is kind of taken off, we kind of realized we actually need to focus more on the kind of remote hiring side of it, because that's the trend, instead of just being like very local.
Yeah, it's very hard for people to even find like good VAs and employees
Exactly.
now.
Yeah.
Can you explain exactly how like this company works for those who don't know?
Yeah. So our official way to explaining this would be we're building the infrastructure for global remote work. The simple analogy I would use is if you're familiar with what Stripe does and how they made it very easy for you to have like an e-commerce store collect payments, we want to be that layer for global hiring and global remote work. So specifically what I mean by that is, let's say you want to hire someone in Nigeria versus Philippines versus Brazil. The first step is contracts. You have to make sure the contracts are locally compliant. All of the PTO requirements, whatever they are, they're like baked into it. That's like the first step. The second step is answering questions like, okay, if I hire someone in Brazil, what are the taxes and pensions and healthcare that I need to do? Now multiply that by like over 100 countries. That's like the next layer that we're trying to solve for. After that, the third layer would be, how do we actually pay them? Like if you're an employer in the US and you want to pay someone in Egypt, how do you actually pay them? That's like another component of it. And we've done a lot of work here because we've realized how valuable just this payments piece is too. And then the last piece is, just because you're in Brazil or Pakistan or somewhere else, that doesn't mean you shouldn't have access to basic financial services like savings or investments. So that's like the last piece of it, which is how do we give these people access to more financial services than they have just because they're in like a specific part of the world. So we wrapped all of that into like an infrastructure API layer. So anybody that wants to participate in this global work trend, it's like dead simple for them to do so.
But how do you compare this to a Stripe, or even how do you not compare, I guess, when you've got a competitor out there that's like that? How do you essentially start something in this market?
Yeah, Stripe is similar in some ways, not so similar in other ways. They're a very generic sort of payment processor, whereas a lot of the stuff we do, for example, like with compliance, statutory payments, taxes, pensions, all of those are very specific to payroll. So Stripe might be able to solve some problem, like a subset of the problem, but if you want to do the whole thing across the whole value chain, from like HR to compliance to taxes to pension, that's where we kind of come in, because we're like a one-stop solution for you.
Wow. All right. So when you launched this, what are some of the early things that you learned? Like for anyone who wants to become an entrepreneur, doesn't want to make many mistakes at the beginning. Give me like some of the early on, the harder stuff.
Yeah, so the first thing, again, the very first mistake we made, again, because we're both kind of product engineering based people, is our bias is always to build and then to kind of validate, which isn't the right ordering. Whenever you want to try something new, try to validate it first. It's not that hard. Yeah. Even the stuff that we were doing, we could have done it completely manually over like spreadsheets if you wanted to. But the important thing is, okay, just get a customer and try to get their feedback and try to understand how exactly you should go about this. That's the one thing. The other thing I would say is just keep trying things. That's like the other thing. Sometimes we kind of get lost in these, like we try to come up with like these very detailed like plans of, okay, if we do this, this is what's going to happen. But the truth is, like, it's very hard to know until you actually do it. So have more of a sort of bias. If you want to experiment with different things, do it quickly instead of like spending a ton of time either building it out or like doing this detailed P&L.
That initial 100K that you guys put in, what was your runway for that amount?
That was going to sustain us for at least 2 years, because for both us personally and also like the few employees that we have.
Do you guys eat? Like how 50K each for 2 years?
Yeah, I mean we were roommates, so like our rent is kind of half.
Okay.
And then,
are you guys still roommates?
No, we were until he got married, and then his wife and I was like, we need to go. Okay.
It's like, wow, if you guys are still, even with 7.5 and funding.
We were until like last year.
Yeah, okay.
And his wife was like, no.
No, it's not happening. I give you credit, because I mean, co-founder, that is hard, and I can't even imagine like living. But I feel like guys are also different. Like you can go into this full, almost like build mode, where you don't really do anything else. Yeah. That's what I've realized about guys in tech. But at what point did you raise then after that original?
So we actually got into an accelerator within like a few months of when we started doing this. So we got into 500 Global, if you've heard of them. No. So they're like an accelerator out of SF. So we got into them. They gave us like a couple of 100K, and that allowed us to at least hire a few more people and kind of keep that going. And then the following year, we raised a little bit of money, and then we closed our seed round earlier this year.
Had you been applying for accelerators? Because a lot of people don't, they know about YC, and then there's another one I've heard of called Antler.
Okay.
But I assume there's others out there.
Yeah, as soon as we went full time on this, we were like, okay, let's at least try to do an accelerator or something. We have our kind of safety net, but it would be helpful if somebody gave us like another 150K that would kind of sustain us for a while. So yeah, we started applying and got into this one, and it was very helpful to kind of.
But were there like rules behind it? Because there was one I had looked into with another startup, and they give you that money, but I don't know if they put it in a safe or a convertible note.
Yeah.
It is. So then do you have to give that money back?
It's just they take a equity, like they're giving you 150, 300K, and
for how much equity?
Usually it's like 7%.
So you gave them 7%, and. At this point, now that you've raised more, I'm assuming you've given more equity.
Yeah, no, now we've done like a full seed round. But at that point, yeah, it was just, that's like the standard for most of these accelerators, or at least it was in 2021. So that gave us a little bit more kind of cushion to.
But that's also a lot of equity to give away.
Yeah, I mean, early on, like there's not much, you don't have a lot to going for you, right? You don't have a lot of customers, you don't have a lot of product builds. It's mostly just they're betting on you as humans to be like execute, as opposed to you showing them something, which is what we did for our seed round because we had a lot of traction and actual product build that made that part easier.
Have you also given, are you able to disclose how much of equity that you've actually given away to date?
Yeah, without going to specific numbers, I think whenever you do like a full round, you give away somewhere in the range of like 20 to 25%.
Wow, okay.
For every round that you do. So that's roughly like.
That's huge though. So if you guys were ever to sell this company, you would make, that minus what? 30-40%?
Yeah, so that's like an important kind of question that I think entrepreneurs should ask themselves before they take VC funding, because once you take VC funding, the game you're playing is very different from like a bootstrap business, right? Once you take in money, you're trying to make this like $1 billion, $10 billion company, versus if you bootstrap it, you could even get to like 10, 20, 30 million, whatever, and sell it, and that would still be a very good outcome for you. But when you take in VC money, you're actually expecting like the vision that you're betting on is going to be very, very large. So that's the mode that we're in.
How long did that original first raise take you? Because a lot of people don't understand as well the ecosystem behind raising, but I have talked to so many founders who are like, don't take VC money if you literally don't need to.
Yeah. So the accelerator money was very simple. Like once you kind of get into an accelerator, they're gonna give you money. The actual fundraising process took us a while.
What is a while? Like 4 months or 4 years?
Well, no, more than 3 months at least. And we also raised in like a few chunks. So the initial chunk, at least like 3 months.
Okay, which I feel like is traditional because they say you should do it in a very short amount of time.
Yeah,
right?
because the longer you drag it on, a lot of the VCs, they kind of lose interest over time too. So you have to kind of build momentum and close deals while you can instead of just like dragging them out.
So if you, looking back, could have bootstrapped it and kept the company going without having to take VC money, would you still have taken it?
If I was in a business that didn't require this much capital, yes. But the reality of what we're doing is there's a ton of compliance and regulatory and fintech overhead that we have to spend money on. So most of our money goes to like compliance, like payment licenses, regulatory licenses that we have to deal with, like HR and legal experts that we have to pay. So the nature of what we're doing, I think, is inherently requires a lot of capital. But if I was doing something that didn't require, then no, I probably wouldn't raise.
Tell me what one person wouldn't know about the process of raising, like the best part and the worst part. And not like the 100K. I'm talking about like when you're raising $1 million plus.
Yeah. I think you have to understand the motivations of the VCs that you're raising from. So if you are trying to build like a VC-backed business, you have to understand that those people are betting on like 100 companies, and for most of them are going to fail, but 1 or 2 are going to succeed, and that's going to like cover their whole fund. So when you're pitching to them, you have to paint them like a big picture, right? You have to paint them how this can be like a $1, $10, $5 billion company, because that's what they're looking for. If you want to build a $50, $100 million business, you shouldn't go to VCs because that's not the game that they're playing.
Yeah. How did you get in the door with those VCs? Was it cold emailing, cold
Yeah,
calling?
usually I have a friend who also is a founder, so we got some referrals through him, and then once we got talking to at least a few investors, then we got referrals through through those investors. But normally you should try to find at least one person, even if it's like a third-degree connection that you can talk to. And most of these people are generally very helpful to like connect you to other people.
Did you do any cold calling, like cold emailing with investors?
Most of it was just through referrals.
Yeah.
We tried to find at least one. Cold emailing for us, it was a little bit hard because we didn't have like any context to like share with them of how we even kind of got there. So for us, we were like, okay, let's at least try to find at least a foot in the door, and then we can kind of expand from there.
So along this journey, was there one moment where you really were like, this company has legs, like there's potential here where I wouldn't need to go back to a job, or do you still feel like?
Oh no, there's days like that, like every so often. There's also days where you're like, this is not gonna work.
Why? Like, what is that feeling like?
It's just so many ups and downs that you go through. I think because personally you've invested so much into this, and you're kind of basing a lot of what you do in life on this. Like even the slightest win or like the smallest loss just has like a huge emotional kind of impact on you, right? So we might close a big deal today and we're like, wow, this is going to be like a $10 billion company in like 2 years. Or we might lose a customer, or like someone doesn't follow through with their contract and we're like, okay, maybe there's no way this is going to work. So I mean, that's just the roller coaster you kind of have to go on, which is why it helps to have at least a co-founder that you can share those with and kind of keep a balance heading. But no, I think it happens like so often.
Do you guys have a good relationship as founders and then also friends, or do you keep it mostly business?
We do. I mean, like I said, he's one of my closest friends. We have very similar upbringing. We have very similar values, and I think that's the most kind of important thing.
Yeah.
Because you've interviewed a lot of founders. You can tell me if this is wrong, but most of the issues people have in early stage companies are like founder conflicts.
Yes.
So I think respect and just having a very high kind of moral standard for each other, that's like the baseline. And if you have that, for example, we don't have complementary skills, at least when we started, because we were both very similar backgrounds, which some might say is like not a good thing. You need to find someone who can do one or the other. But I personally think what matters most is like you need to work with someone you can trust, especially in the early stages, because things are going to go wrong inevitably. You're going to fail. A lot of stuff is going to go wrong. And that's when your actual true character and what you do actually matters. Yeah.
I'm interested about the part where you said hiring for like HR and those, was it consultants almost you have to hire for? Yeah,
pretty much. So you need legal experts, whether it's our own employees or your outsourced legal, for all of the countries that we do HR in. So if you're paying taxes in Brazil, you need like a local presence that's actually doing the taxes, right? And now you have to do this across all of the countries that we do it. So we do it in like 50 countries today, for example. So for each of those, we need to have like a local presence. So it's a lot of like operational overhead that goes into it. But our whole vision is that all of that process should be abstracted away from the end user. So they don't have to think about this, because it is messy, it's complicated, it's very expensive. But we just want to do it once, and we want to do it at scale, so that anybody who wants to be a part of this global remote work trend, for them it's like as easy as like Stripe is like for e-commerce.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So looking back at this whole experience for you of going from a normal job to entrepreneurship, what piece of advice would you have given yourself, knowing what you know now, at the beginning of when you left that job and decided to pursue this?
Ooh, be prepared for a lot more failure. I think that was like the biggest. I was pretty good at school, to be honest. I never really had bad grades. College I was pretty okay too. But it's when I started the company and like things weren't working, and I was like, am I good enough to even like do this? There's so many times where you just start to like doubt yourself.
Yeah.
But just know that that's part of the experience. Like that's part of just growing up and becoming a better entrepreneur. So just expect going in that you don't know anything. You're always going to be learning. I'm still learning every day. That's kind of like my day job, is just to understand all of the things that come up. So just go into that mindset, just be like a sponge, and be like, okay, failure is going to happen. It's part of the process. Just kind of keep pushing through. And as long as your startup doesn't run out of money or die, just have faith that you can figure it out.
It's wild how many startups come and go just in this entire like ecosystem. I mean, I've even seen ones that have raised multi-millions of dollars, and then the next day it's almost like you never hear from them again, which I don't really ever understand. I mean, I'm in that space, but I've never personally raised money. But when I see like the evaluation, you know, a random startup and it's like evaluated at $10 billion.
Then it goes under like in a year.
Yeah, I mean, you raised, so you probably understand that ecosystem a bit more than I do. But I mean, do you know why that is?
Yeah, so I think 2021 was like a year that kind of inflated all these valuations and everything. But ultimately, if you raise a lot of money, the mistake that a lot of people make is they like increase their burn in proportion to how much money they've raised, instead of focusing on actually building like a business with like good unit economics, right? So a lot of these businesses, when they raise like hundreds of millions, they're also spending hundreds of millions of dollars, right? Not actually trying to focus on the core business. And if inevitably after 2021 interest rates go up, all of the tech spending goes down, maybe you had product market fit back then, but now with the reduced spending, maybe you don't. Now you're in a space where your burn is still high, but your revenue is not where it needs to be, and you kind of have no choice except to kind of turn it off and kind of start over, because you've also given away all this company, a lot of your equity to all these investors.
I've interviewed a lot of founders who have raised, it's especially common in the tech field, right? And I think people who don't understand what it's like to be in this industry think like, oh, you've raised $7 million, you can just take that $7 million.
I
and
wish.
it's like, what, right, 0.1% of that goes to your salary, and the rest it just goes. Do you have investors that you, or have you had any investors who are like not the right investor, or they're so involved? Because I mean, when somebody has equity, right, and that's I think what people don't necessarily always know about raising, is that means you have so many more people now to answer to.
It's true. I'd say we've been lucky. We only have like 3 major investors that own most of the money that they gave us. So, and they're all super helpful. And they're also very, they kind of trust us to do the right thing in a lot of ways. And we've also like, they trust us because we've shown them that we're doing the right thing by not increasing our burn like too much, even though we've raised money. But I do understand that there does come a lot of sort of pressure and expectation. And if you do onboard the wrong kind of investor, you're kind of screwed. The thing they say is like, it's almost like picking like a life partner.
For sure.
If anything, getting a divorce from a life partner is easier than breaking up with an investor. So it's even like, you need more due diligence to do on them before you just take someone's money. So you just have to be picky. A lot of people can offer you money, but you have to personally decide if you're in line with what their expectations are.
Can you call an investor up and just ask for advice? Like,
Yeah.
how does that? You can?
Yeah.
Okay.
One of our investors, we message him on WhatsApp, and like 99% of the time, within 5 minutes, he responds.
Wow.
He's like super, super, super helpful.
So there's no necessarily guidelines to how to interact with like investors when...
It depends on your relationship with them. Again, we have a very good relationship.
How did you meet that one?
Referrals.
Okay.
Through the friend, yeah. It really depends. For most of our major investors, we basically just send them a text, be like, hey, we want to chat about this, and usually within the hour we're like on the phone with them.
Yeah. And what about for mentors? I mean, for you along the course of your career, aside from investors, have you gotten advice from a lot of people? Do you feel like now you mentor more people than you get given?
Yeah. I think our investors, again, have been very helpful, just connecting us to other companies that they have in the portfolio. Because even when it comes to advice, I think you have to be careful and you have to be very selective who you take it from.
Of course.
So our bias is mostly to take it from other people who have built either similar companies or like are in the same kind of sphere. But I think at the end of the day, a lot of the stuff, even with advice, is like all these situations are so personal. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, they can give you advice, but you are the one who kind of has to go through the shit and actually make it happen.
Love that. That's like the real grind of a founder. So what's the end goal? I mean, you're not like a Stripe, but you're in the fintech market. Where would you like to see this company going?
Yeah, I think for us, we just want to continue building in that infrastructure and make it available to as many people as we can. Ideally, we want to do it ourselves, but if that meant getting acquired by like a bigger payment processor so that we can use their distribution, we're open to that too. But ultimately, it's just how do we make this accessible for as many remote workers as we can. What
makes you fearless?
Oh, I mean, I don't think I'm fearless. There's so many...
You started a company.
There's so many times I doubt myself. I think it's just, for me, it's always this... optimization of regret. I just want to at any given point like, okay, if I don't do this now, am I gonna regret this in like 5 years, 10 years? And that generally, if you think on a long enough kind of time scale, that helps you kind of see that maybe the fears that you have are not as valid as like in that specific moment, just to give it perspective.
I really appreciate what you say about saying that like you can always go back to what you were doing. I mean, I don't see any world where that would happen to you.
Hopefully not.
No, but you know, it's just nice to hear, because I think that's why people don't pursue entrepreneurship, if they're too scared of what they could fail at instead of realizing they could always go back to what they're good at.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense. But where can everyone find you on social media as well as find out?
Yeah, Cadana, follow us on LinkedIn. That's where we usually post the updates. For me personally, I'm on Instagram, just my name.
I love LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I've like recently started realizing like LinkedIn is the best social networking tool
for
work.
It's becoming one.
Yeah.
Even though,
I don't know why. I just interviewed a VP from LinkedIn, and after that I was like, oh, I really need to start like utilizing LinkedIn. And then I really started realizing like, wow, there's a lot of power here, because I don't love the other social media platforms. But LinkedIn I find to be, would you say that like if you hadn't had these referrals from investors, you would have cold messaged people on LinkedIn?
For sure.
Do you do that now?
That's what I did for when I was applying for internships.
Yeah.
When I was in college.
Yeah.
It's just like a sales funnel you have to run. It's like a numbers game.
Always.
Yeah.
If you can cold email or message like 5 to 20 people a day, or ideally even a week.
It's literally just a numbers game.
No, for sure.
Yeah.
One person will reply. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me
on the show. Thank you so much to everyone who tuned in. If you want to find out more about Ameer and the company, head to the show notes, and then make sure to follow myself and Dare to Be Fearless on social media, which you can also find about more in the show notes for this episode. And I'll see you guys next week for a new episode of Dare to Be Fearless.